Welcome to Living Transplant, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the transplant program at Toronto General Hospital and brings you open and honest conversations about the transplant experience. My name is Candace, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Center for Living Organ Donation. I'm also a kidney transplant recipient. This is where I developed my passion to support others in their journey to navigate the world of transplant. Full disclosure, I'm not a physician, and I'm not here to give you medical advice. Think of me as your guide through the world of transplant to educate, inspire, pique your curiosity, and fuel your passion. Living Transplant will show you the world of transplant like you've never seen it before. Welcome back to the Living Transplant podcast. This is a special episode of Behind the Scenes at the Banff CST conference. The conference connects members of the Canadian Society of Transplantation with cutting-edge science and leading clinical practices that can be used to advance the practice and science of transplantation in Canada. In this episode, I'm joined by members who presented at the conference. You will hear from Dr. Marcelo Sippel about universal blood types, Ghazaleh Ahmadzadeh about the relationship between African, Caribbean, and Black kidney transplant candidates and recipients and their healthcare providers in living donation, Dr. Dipali Kumar about boosters and antibodies preventing COVID in transplantation, Jeff Green and Rihanna Bowling, who discuss a modernized pan-Canadian organ donation and transplantation data and performance reporting system. Dr. Caroline Tate joins me to discuss presumed consent legislation and why engagement of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit health leaders are key to decision-making. Dr. Heather Ross speaks about women in transplant and how to test your limits. And lastly, I am joined by Dr. Massimo Mangiola, who speaks about the immunology of xenotransplantation. I hope you enjoy this compilation from presenters at Banff CST. Stay tuned for future episodes, and thank you so much for listening.
My name is Marcelo Sippel, and I'm a thoracic surgeon and lung transplant surgeon here at UAGen, and I also serve as the surgical director for the Ajmera Transplant Center.
And so this may be hard to answer, but what would an average day for you look like?
Very busy. From surgeries starting very early on, sometimes transplants late, clinic visits, many patients rounds in the ICU, and also teaching activities as well as research activities.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I have a lab that has also many students and fellows doing full-time research.
Wow. So thinking about that research, you are going to be presenting about universal blood type transplantation. Can you tell me a little bit about your presentation at CST?
Yeah, so we're going to present the data that we actually recently published, but we have done further experiments also since the publication. And what we showed in this study was that actually we could convert organs from blood type A donors to O type.
Wow.
And so they become universal blood type organs. And the main motivation for this was the fact that oftentimes we have very sick patients on the wait list that they can't have the next available organ because it's not the right blood type. And blood type is the first thing we screen when we have a donor to match into the recipient. So if we could transform most of our donors in universal blood type organs, then I think we'll create a much more efficient and equal distribution of the donors to the patients most in need.
Wow, that's remarkable. So if this universal blood type became a reality, would that be another step towards making the transplants much more accessible and easier for donors to donate to their loved ones or deceased donation? Could it be used in that scenario as well?
Absolutely. I mean, this could be applicable both for deceased donation and also live donation, right? Because the process that we do to remove those antigens from the organ, which classify them as blood type A or B, is done after the organ is removed from the donor, right? And so there is no implications for the donor itself, but could have huge implications for the recipients. Again, you take the top barrier for organ allocation. I wouldn't say a barrier, but the top criteria is actually the blood type, right? Mm-hmm. So you can, let's say, ignore that now. Wow. And go to the second criteria, which could be size or other things that we have to take in account, right?
Mm-hmm. That's remarkable. I think this is an incredibly fascinating and exciting innovation that you have found here. I'm wondering how far in the future would the implementation of this technology be?
Yeah, so I think we'll be able to apply that relatively soon. I mean, this is just to highlight, this is being done in collaboration with some investigators from UBC, University of British Columbia.
Wonderful.
Who helped develop the enzyme that actually cleave the sugar from the cells. And this sugar, again, the A blood type is a sugar that is on the surface of the cells that cover the blood vessels. The preclinical studies we have done in using human lungs, they have shown that we can remove 99% of these antigens. When we reintroduce blood from a different blood type into the organ, we didn't see any signs of rejection, right?
Wow.
Now, we still don't have data to know long-term what will be the effect. Mm-hmm. And because it's difficult to have animal models because animals have different blood types, it's difficult to study this in animal models, but we feel that we can start this in the clinical setting by using a subset of donors that have low expression of the antigens to a subset of recipients that have a low level of antibodies, right? So it will be kind of a gradual introduction of this into the clinical practice, because those two groups, even if there is, let's say, if the enzyme doesn't work, okay, mm-hmm. there is still ways of treating those patients and they can do well. Wow. Okay? So that will be kind of our safety net for the beginning. And I believe in 2023, we'll be introducing this to the clinical arena in this population.
Wow, that's remarkable. That's fascinating. Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to share either about this incredible research or a message to the potential recipients or potential donors about what that impact could be for them?
I think the main impact will be that we'll be able to transplant sicker patients sooner, mm-hmm. Because we'll be able to allocate the next organs for them. The other comment I would like to make, although our work was done exclusively in lungs, mm-hmm. this is applicable to all organs, right? So the mechanism that the enzyme cleaves, the sugar is the same in any organ. And in fact, recently, a group from the UK has followed our footsteps and have done some pilot studies in kidneys as well, without transplantation, just on the preclinical side. Hmm. But this is just to show that I think this will come to all organs in the future and will help a lot. I think we'll learn a lot when we do the initial clinical trials. Mm-hmm. But I think the potential as a clinical surgeon that I receive the offers every day. I can see the need for that.
Yes.
And also not only will facilitate more equal distribution, but also there are situations where sometimes we receive a donor offer from a specific blood type and we don't have the right recipient to match for that organ.
Right.
So those organs are often not used, right? And so we'll be able then to use also more organs for transplant that could be discarded in the current practice.
Amazing. Some people, when they were initially talking about transplant, because of their blood types, they were told 4 to 6 years or potentially longer for a deceased donation. So this could potentially help those people as well, so that they don't have to wait as long when they have those different blood types.
Absolutely.
Wow.
I think for kidney, the main impact is exactly that. We'll shorten the wait list time. Fortunately, the kidney patients, they can still stay on the wait list doing dialysis. It's not a pleasant thing, but they stay. But this is very important, again, because the wait time adds complications, morbidity, and so on. Now, for other organs, like, for example, lung and heart, that could represent the difference between being alive or dying, because they can't wait the 1 or 2 years.
No.
We're talking about usually months of wait that these people can have.
Wow.
So I think will be benefits on both sides. Each organ will have the specific benefits. Overall, I think the whole transplant field will benefit from this concept. There are still more studies to be done before we can say that it's a home run for the technology. Yeah.
Wow. Recently, we had Dr. Humar on the podcast, and he talked about the Ajmera Transplant Center's Hail Mary, incredibly transformative goal of eventually ending wait lists for potential recipients. And I think listening to you today, it's another example of one more innovative technology that Ajmera team and people across Canada have created that are going to bring us one step closer to ending that wait list. Thank you so much for talking to me today and for all of the remarkable work that you do. We're really appreciative of having someone like you in our corner.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity for explaining this.
Up next, I bring you my conversation with Ghazaleh Ahmadzadeh about the relationship between African, Caribbean, and Black kidney transplant candidates and recipients and their healthcare providers in living donation. Enjoy.
My name is Ghazaleh Ahmadzadeh, and I recently graduated from my undergrad at U of T. I have been working with Dr. Muchi's team, so under his supervision, and I've been doing some qualitative work for the past almost 2.5 years now. I have been primarily focusing on transcripts from African, Caribbean, and Black patient groups. So I have been analyzing patient transcripts, and I have been talking to other community members and really listening to their experiences and their challenges in pursuing LDKT, and not just LDKT, but kidney transplant in general and organ donation.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit about that research and tell us about the presentation that you have done at the Banff CST conference and what that all entails.
My presentation today at CST was focused on the relationship between patients and their healthcare providers. And as we know, the relationship between patients and their healthcare providers is an integral aspect of their pathway in pursuing and receiving living donor kidney transplant and kidney transplant in general. Basically, in our study, we aim to explore, based on the data obtained from our participants in Toronto, Ontario, the relationship between patients and their healthcare providers and the potential implications of this relationship to LDKT, or living donor kidney transplant. Our study highlighted that ACB patients desire a respectful, open, trustworthy, and collaborative relationship with their healthcare providers, as do all patients.
Mhm.
However, our analysis also suggested that these expectations are more frequently met if healthcare providers are also from ACB communities, and the absence of this relationship may prevent important conversations about kidney health and be a significant barrier to exploring and pursuing LDKT in this population.
In the presentation, you mentioned a very shocking statistic about the difference between white patients and the ACB community in receiving living donor kidney transplants. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The Canadian data suggests that patients of African, Caribbean, and Black descent with kidney failure are 65 to 70% less likely to receive living donor kidney transplantation compared to white patients. And this could be due to many different reasons. And in our study, we basically want to see why that is, and taking a look at it from a qualitative standpoint. So I actually submitted another abstract last year to CST, and that abstract was focused on fears of patients, which could contribute to the disparity. The most recent abstract was focused on the relationship between healthcare providers and patients. So you could imagine that the main three, I guess, sub-themes in my recent abstract was that patients want a more person-centered approach. They want a judgment-free interaction with their healthcare providers. They want an increased representation in the healthcare system. So you could imagine that if a patient is not comfortable with their healthcare provider, if they are scared of, if they're afraid of being judged or coming across as uneducated, and so for that reason they withhold their questions, that has an implication in pursuing LDKT or kidney transplant for that matter. And this is especially important for the ACB population. They have said again and again in many of the interviews that they feel way more comfortable with a healthcare provider from their own ethnic background and somebody that looks like them, and they can break things down with them and be themselves when talking to them. So again, that's another aspect that's very important in the relationship between healthcare providers and patients. That is why so many of our participants have recommended or wanted greater diversity within the healthcare system.
I'm wondering if you have any ideas, and if anything has come forward in your research about how to make a change in our healthcare system to make living donor kidney transplant more equitable and more accessible for all patients.
Yeah, absolutely. As I guess that's also a future direction for us in our research group. So we are hoping to use the understanding of the experiences and these expectations and desires of ACB patients to contribute to the development of interventions to improve equitable access and utilization. And we are actually currently working on a website that is meant to provide all the information necessary regarding kidney transplant, living donor kidney transplant, deceased donor kidney transplant, organ donation. And we are actually co-developing this website with ACB community members and our ACB partners. So we are getting their input, their stories, their experiences, challenges, and we're hoping that future patients or even current patients could make use of this website. We're hoping to cater this towards the ACB community. Something else that could potentially be done is healthcare providers training to improve their relationship with their patients. This training could focus on improving educational methods to skills to enhance person-centered care for physicians, and which emphasizes creation of culturally safe environments within the healthcare system.
Thank you so much for all of that information. I'm wondering if there is anything else that you would like to share with the Living Transplant podcast listeners.
It was an absolute pleasure to be on your podcast. I would really recommend for people to check out other episodes on this podcast and to check out our website, nephros.net. We have more information regarding our future work, recent publications, action project, and I think it's a great resource for everyone interested to check out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And before we leave, anyone who is listening who wants to learn more about transplant and more about stories from the ACB community and research from the community, we do have an ACB Organ Health YouTube channel through the Center for Living Organ Donation that you can check out as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Your presentation today was fantastic, and I'm happy that the listeners get to hear a little bit about it.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
COVID has dominated a lot of our conversations lately, but one perspective that we always appreciate hearing is that of our physicians and how to stay safe. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Dipali Kumar about boosters and antibodies and preventing COVID in transplantation. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm wondering if you can introduce yourself to our listeners and a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Dipali Kumar. I am Director of Transplant Infectious Diseases at the Edgemera Transplant Center in Toronto, and I'm Professor of Medicine at the University of Toronto. So what I do on a daily basis is I see patients who've had transplants and now have infections and prescribe antibiotics and antivirals and antifungals. And I also have a research program where in the last couple of years, we've primarily been working on COVID research.
Amazing. Thank you. That is a topic that I think most listeners are going to be very interested in hearing about today. So thank you so much. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your presentation this week at Banff.
So at this COVID session, which I'll be presenting at during the CST conference, I'll be discussing two main things. The first is up-to-date information on COVID vaccines and which types of vaccines are recommended for transplant recipients for best protection. I'll be showing some of the research that our group and others have done that leads to making these recommendations. And of course, I'll be talking about how we're going to use the newly approved bivalent vaccines. And then the second part of my talk will be on something called passive immunization and how we can supplement vaccine immunity in transplant recipients with an injection of antibodies.
Oh, that's fascinating. How does that impact transplant patients? And thinking about our vaccines and how many we've had and thinking about the number of doses that we've been told to get. I know it's a very large topic to think about, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that impact to our community.
Sure. So one of the most important things that came out of our research was in 2021, we published on the third dose of COVID vaccine. So if you recall back then, the recommendation was that everybody get 2 doses of vaccine. Mm-hmm. And at UHN, we did a trial that showed that the third dose of vaccine in transplant recipients was a must and very necessary to get good protection. And because of that, the recommendations changed in Canada, as well as the United States, and actually across the world, that the primary series for transplant recipients should be 3 doses. Now, following that, we've been looking at 4 doses and 5 doses of vaccine, and we're leading a large Canadian study that is following over 500 transplant recipients to see how well the 4th dose and the 5th dose works. And what we found so far is that, yes, you definitely get a boost in your antibodies after 4th and 5th doses. So it is very important to keep up to date on those booster doses.
Amazing. There's been a lot in the news lately about Evusheld and the bivalent vaccines. I'm wondering if you could speak to those, about how they impact us transplant patients.
So the bivalent vaccine was recently approved in Canada as well as the United States. And this is the same vaccine that we've had originally. So this is an mRNA vaccine, but they've changed it a little bit to include the Omicron strain.
Okay.
So it actually includes half of the original strain, or half of what it includes is the original strain, and the other half is an Omicron strain. And so what we hope from this vaccine is that transplant recipients would get a better antibody response against Omicron. That's what's been shown in the general population. And our research group is now moving forward to look at bivalent vaccines and how well they'll work in the transplant setting. So the recommendation now is that no matter how many booster doses you've had, that you should receive a dose of the bivalent vaccine 3 to 6 months after any previous booster dose.
And then Evusheld, how is that different from the vaccines?
So Evusheld is something that we call passive immunization. So when you get a normal vaccine, your body has to process that vaccine and make an immune response and make antibodies. Evusheld is just antibodies, so it requires no processing. So you can just get an injection and within a couple of days, you have an antibody level. So your body doesn't actually have to process it like it would for a vaccine. And so Evusheld has been found to be effective in reducing the rate of Omicron infections in the BA1 and BA2 wave. We are still waiting for data to see how well it will work for the BA5 wave, which is the current wave. But we hope that it will work in a similar fashion. So one thing with Evusheld is that it is not a replacement for vaccination. I think that's something that's important to emphasize. You still need to get your vaccines, but if you want that extra layer of protection, then Evusheld would be the way to go.
Okay. So from a transplant patient processing all of this, I've had 5 doses. So really, I should just stop counting my doses and get the bivalent vaccine 3 to 6 months after the current vaccine that I've had. And then Evusheld is also a great booster for me as well to think about getting.
Correct. So we do have to stop counting now. I think we're moving in the direction where what we need to be thinking is, are we up to date with our vaccines? So in the past, it was, well, have you had 2 doses, 3, 4, 5 doses?
Right.
Now we're moving towards just saying, am I up to date? Which essentially means, have you had a booster in the last 6 to 12 months of the latest vaccine? And in this case, being up to date would mean having that booster of bivalent vaccine in your system. And so what would happen is the priority is getting the vaccination. Then if you want that additional layer of protection, wait a couple of weeks after your last booster, and then go ahead and get the Evusheld.
Okay.
Now, I will say, and I will mention this in my presentation later on as well, that Evusheld is not available in every province.
Right.
Each province has different recommendations and different criteria for administering Evusheld. So I think it's important to find out your province's recommendations regarding Evusheld.
Fantastic. Thank you. That is a great overview of such a huge, massive topic and a lot of hard work and research. And I think from the perspective of all of us transplant recipients, I just want to say thank you for all of the hard work that you've done and that your team has done at UHN, because throughout this process, it has been very scary and very isolating to be a transplant recipient through the pandemic. But knowing that we have researchers and doctors and a whole team behind us who are really working towards making sure that we are safe has made it a lot more manageable for us. So thank you so much for everything that you and your team has done. It's really greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you have anything else that you would like to share with our Living Transplant podcast audience.
Well, I'll just say that even after you've gotten your vaccines and Evusheld, I think it's still very important to take those precautions. If your immune system is suppressed, it is still important to avoid those crowds and wear a mask and protect yourself. I think we're just going to have to learn to live with COVID. It's not going away anytime soon. And I think it has established itself in the population and will probably continue to circulate. We'll probably see waves in the future. And so I think personal protection will still be really, really important.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that we've been able to steal you away for a little bit of time to bring all of this amazing research and information to patients and families. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
The next discussion I have for you is with Jeff Green and Rihanna Bowling, who discuss the development of a modernized pan-Canadian organ donation and transplantation data and performance reporting system. Enjoy. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome.
Likewise. Thanks for having us.
I'm wondering if you can introduce yourself to our audience, Rihanna.
Sure, I can start. My name is Rihanna Bowling. I'm a program lead at the Canadian Institute for Health Information, CIHI for short, and I'll pass it over to my colleague, Jeff.
Thanks, Rihanna. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Green. I'm the Senior Director of our Organ Donation and Transplantation Program at Canada Health Infoway.
Fantastic. And so can you tell me a little bit about your presentation that you've done this week at the conference and what that is all about?
Sure, maybe I'll take a first stab. So yeah, we were really excited to be a part of the meeting this week. And our presentation was focused on a pan-Canadian project that our two organizations, CIHI and Infoway, are co-leading on behalf of Health Canada. And it's a project that's really focused on really the modernization of the way that data is managed and reported across the organ donation and transplantation spectrum. So what that really means in terms of the work we're doing is we are procuring and implementing point of service solutions. So the software that clinicians use to manage their workflow, both within organ donation organizations, as well as in transplantation centers in acute care hospitals across the country, with the main purpose being that they will collect consistent data that will then be digitally seamlessly submitted into a newly created pan-Canadian ODT data repository that's going to be managed by CIHI, Rihanna's organization, on an ongoing basis. And that will have data from ODT activity across the country that can then be used to report on performance on an ongoing way and use that to support quality improvement and efficiency initiatives.
Fantastic. What has the progress been from the past year of what you've implemented so far?
Great. I think I can cover that for you. And Jeff, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, you bet.
So in terms of CIHI's progress on workstream activities, which are done in parallel to Infoway's, we've made significant progress to date on developing national data standards for deceased donation, living donation, and transplantation, all readily available on our project website, kaihi.ca/ODT. So that's very exciting work, and it really lays the foundation for the standards and the data that we're going to collect embedded at point of care solutions that Jeff spoke about. And then that will feed into the pan-Canadian indicators and the important measures we're going to be able to capture and report on from the CIHI side. And over to you, Jeff, for the progress on InfoWay.
Yeah, sure. So at the same time that CIHI has been leading that really important work, we've been collaborating with stakeholders from across the country to work on a public procurement process to identify a solution, like a technology solution for management of deceased donation data. So I'm happy to report that we actually completed that initiative last year, and we were able to announce that Transplant Connect was the preferred vendor identified through our process. And they have a product called iTransplant that is going to be deployed to a number of provinces across the country. So now we've moved from that sort of planning process to getting ready to really move into implementation within specific provinces.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And Candace, maybe I'll close off with the other work stream that CIHI is leading, which is the development of the pan-Canadian indicators. So over the past year, we've led extensive engagement. So we've met with over 100 ODT members from across the country, and this ranges from clinicians, decision makers, ministries of health representatives, and of course, patients, families, and donors to seek their perspective on what's important to measure and what's going to go into the performance reporting that will be in CIHI. So that's an important progress to date. We've completed that work, and now we're moving to the exciting phase of developing all those indicators for reporting.
Wow, that's a lot of work for you guys.
We're busy.
Yeah, I bet. And so I'm wondering as well, if you could talk to me a little bit about the data and how all of this would contribute to making transplant and transplant data more accessible and equitable for patients and providers across the country.
I can speak to that, Candace. So when we think about it, a modernized ODT data and performance reporting system is really needed. And because we need that, it's going to be able to improve the quality and efficiency of our care, equity of access to transplantation for all of Canadians, really to enable better patient outcomes for both transplant recipients and, of course, living donors across Canada.
Wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. And so I'm wondering if both of you have anything that you'd like to share, either about the Banff presentation or about your organization as a whole, to our listeners that could provide them maybe some insight into what you do, or just a message of hope of what's to come.
Sure, maybe I'll start, and Rhiannon, I'm sure you'll have comments as well. I think it's been a really positive experience for us to attend the meeting in Banff. I think it was great for our project to have exposure to some new people that weren't as familiar with the work that we were doing. At the same time, it was nice reassurance how many people really already were aware of the work and had heard of it and wanted to learn more. So that was really encouraging. And I think I know I speak for our whole project team when I talk about how meaningful it is for us to be working on this project and such a tangible impact on this important part of our healthcare system, and knowing that it's going to lead to improvements in efficiency of the system, but most importantly in terms of patient outcomes on the transplantation side, and improving the performance on the donation side, and speaking to some of the things that Rhiannon mentioned around missed donor opportunities and important metrics like that. So, and I can also speak for myself personally as the son of a double lung transplant recipient, that really means a lot to me to know that we're helping in that way.
Incredible.
So from my perspective, I'd want to say an echo of thanks to all those that we've engaged with from the ODT community over the past year and previous to get to this point. We hope that the updates and the progress we've shared can give you a picture of what that end goal of a world-leading modernized ODT system is going to look like, and how that's going to potentially provide knowledge and information to those who need it to seek it when they're looking to learn more through their transplantation or their donation journey. So more exciting work ahead to come. It's a process and there's more work ahead for sure, but we're hoping for continued success, continued engagement with patient families and donors to seek your perspective, especially when we think ahead to the public reporting that will come in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And if people want more information about your organizations or about this project, where can they go to find that?
Thanks, Candice. All the latest updates are available on our project webpage, which is the kaihi.ca/ODT, and also available on InfoWay's project webpage as well.
Fantastic.
Which is infoway-inforoute.ca/ODT.
Perfect. Amazing. Thank you both so much. I'm so grateful to have had you on the podcast, and thank you so much for presenting all of this very important information to us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Candice.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I was very lucky to be able to steal our next guest away for a few minutes in between sessions. Dr. Caroline Tate joins me to discuss presumed consent legislation and why engagement of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit health leaders are key to decision-making. Take a listen. Welcome, Dr. Tate.
I'm Dr. Caroline Tate. I am the research lead of the First Nations and Métis Organ Donation and Transplantation Network. It's based in Saskatchewan. I am a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Saskatchewan, but moving in January 2023 to the University of Calgary to become a Canada Research Chair focused on inequities in Indigenous health.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah, I'm excited.
That's amazing. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the presentation that you'll be doing.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the presentation because I think what the presentation will do is that it will draw attention to issues for Indigenous people that maybe others haven't thought about.
Mm-hmm.
So the main focus of the presentation begins with Nova Scotia and the Nova Scotia government, which has passed deemed consent legislation, but did not consult with Indigenous peoples prior to the legislation. So what does that mean? And so in the talk, I refer to what we call free and informed consent. And with Indigenous peoples in Canada, that the government does not have a duty to consult on legislation, on health legislation with Indigenous peoples. There's no legal reason that the governments have to consult with Indigenous peoples. But part of good government and good policy is really to engage Indigenous peoples. But if you look at the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it clearly states in Article 19 that consultation should be done. And so I refer in my talk to the rights of Indigenous peoples, really trying to make a distinction between the ways in which many governments and medical health-related issues are seen that Indigenous people are an ethnic group, or they're a vulnerable group, or they're a group, a marginal group, and there's all kinds of language that's used.
Mm-hmm.
But first and foremost, Indigenous nations, First Nations, Métis nations, Inuit nations are nations, and they hold rights and they hold certain sovereignty over what happens to their people.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly in research, we have a lot of discussion and have for years around data sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And this applies as well as we move forward and we start to look at the development of policy and legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And so the talk that I'm giving, first of all, draws upon that. The second thing that it does is that it talks about where are Indigenous people in the organ donation and transplantation discussion.
Right.
So they're basically absent, although there's some very good researchers, Dr. Jeg Gill and Dr. Aviva Goldberg and others that have been working in this area. Again, their research is just in the in the infancy in some ways. I think they would agree with me that they're doing their best to look at what are the barriers, what are the gaps. How do Indigenous people understand organ donation and transplantation? So even globally, there's very little literature. So that's a real challenge. But I draw attention to the disparities. And so what we have is we have geography, of course, as being a main challenge, where people live, how they access services. And I can't remember the name of the author, but there's an article that I've quoted where the author points out something so important, that where you live is the center of your universe. That's what's normal. So if the North is normal, then we need to start thinking about patient-centered care in the North, not patient-centered care from this distance. And what we have with transplant programs is that they're largely, urban-based, big urban centers. And there's a shortage of organs. So if there's a shortage of organs and your work is in a big urban center, it's really difficult to be concerned about people in remote regions and all the challenges that they face. So that does not mean that Indigenous people in northern and remote regions do not receive transplants. They do. And the people that I've talked to in Saskatchewan that have received transplants have really not many negative things to say about their journey. But most of these individuals were people who are employed. They're people who are better off in our communities. So we don't know, and that's where there's this huge data gap. So we don't know right now how many people who are Indigenous require a transplant. We don't know how many people are being placed on the transplant list, and more importantly, how many are not being placed on the transplant list and the reasons why. We don't know whether Indigenous people are receiving transplants the same as everybody else, or whether there's certain gaps. I wrote a paper that came out in the Circumpolar Journal, the International Journal of Circumpolar Health, in 2022, that talks about the intersection of utility and equity. And so this is really important when we're talking about deemed consent legislation. So what we have with deemed consent legislation is a couple things, and I won't go into any more detail about the equity and utility, but I'll try to pull it into why it's important in the time we have. So if we're looking at organ donation and transplantation, we don't have a lot of information about the ways in which, about the barriers that exist. And so, but when it comes to organ donation, there are a few things that we know. We know that Indigenous people tend not to be organ donors, and that's for a lot of reasons. And the one thing is that to be an organ donor when you live in a remote region, there's a lot of things have to happen for you to be able to be a donor, right? So you have to be in a southern hospital, you have to be, certain conditions need to happen. So there's certainly some of that, but there are cultural issues, although the cultural issues in the literature, at least, and in my discussions with people, and I discuss with people every day in our communities about what they think. So it's not research data, but just in informal conversations, I'm always raising the question of, have you ever considered to be an organ donor? What do you think about organ donation? And there's a real mix from people coming back, where there's people who feel very strongly that if I sign my organ donor card, if they know that I want to be an organ donor and I come into the hospital and I'm in an emergency place, that I may not be given the life-saving care that I need because they want my organs. Now, transplant people in transplant programs will argue, okay, that's not the way it happens. But regardless of the way that it happens, if people perceive this to be an issue, and so why is it that they would perceive it to be an issue? Well, it's because of history. It's because that there's times where the government, the church, the healthcare system, and we just saw the example of Joyce Echaquan in Quebec and Brian Sinclair in Winnipeg, two cases where we avert racism. And so we know that it happens. And so, not to say that the system is entirely racist. That's not what I'm saying, but racism does occur, but also the perception of racism is just as important. So if you have people who perceive an unsafe healthcare environment, well, of course, organ donation, taking your organs, it's not surprising that people would be really hesitant to sign their donor card or to become to notify people to become an organ donor. So that's one thing. The second thing is goes back to that equity and utility question. And so if we have, are we looking at the legislation through an equity lens? And if we're not, what could happen? So is there the risk, and this is, I think, the most salient point of the talk is there a risk that we will end up with more Indigenous people through deemed consent becoming organ donors? But if we don't address the equity issues, that there won't be an increase in the number of Indigenous people receiving organs.
Right.
Because unless the equity issues are addressed, Indigenous people will continue to be excluded from transplant lists because of non-compliance, right? Essentially, non-compliance, and non-compliance is very interesting because it sounds like it's something intentional by the patient. But non-compliance can be that you get stuck in two storms in which you miss 2 appointments and you can't get to your appointment. So from the point of view of someone who's deciding who should get an organ over other people, because there's a shortage, that decision always is to be made. Are you going to choose the person who post-operative might not be able to adhere to the regime after the operation, or who haven't been able to make the appointments? So I don't think that any of these are easy decisions or easy considerations. But what we really need in the context that we're working is to try to find ways to better collect data so we can actually answer those questions that I outlined. Because without answering those questions, even in terms of racism, I can argue that there's racism in the system. And if somebody says to me, show me there's racism in organ donation and transplantation, I actually can't show that to you. I could show you maybe a case study or 2 of people who felt that they experienced racism. But one of the ways that you can look to see if there's a bias within the system that is based upon the identity of the person being Indigenous is to break down Inuit, Métis, and First Nations and look to see who is being placed on transplant lists, right? So it appears that when Indigenous people are on transplant lists, they receive transplants at this relatively, they maybe not as frequently as other people, but that they are receiving transplants. So that brings us then to the question of what about the people who don't make it on the transplant list? What happened to them? Why weren't they placed on the transplant list? So I think the deemed consent legislation, that equity piece where we could see more Indigenous people as organ donors, but fewer receiving, right? And then the other thing is just general trust in the system. So what happens if Indigenous people decide that they want to push back against this, that they would prefer for an opt-in rather than an opt-out system? And does an opt-in system or an opt-out system, a deemed consent system, in terms of free and informed consent? So if provinces start like Nova Scotia to implement this without proper consultation, then what you have is you have a breach of this free and informed consent according to Article 19. Now, I may be over exaggerating. Of course, it would have to be sorted out through legal people who would know, but just on face value, it looks like it's a valued argument. And so in that way, you may have this backlash towards transplantation that may in fact have the opposite effect of what we want, which is we want more Indigenous people to want to become organ donors. We want more Indigenous people to receive organs. And that maybe with consultation and inclusion of Indigenous people in the deemed consent legislation discussion, that then we could look at it through the equity lens to make sure that the legislation includes certain considerations around equity that I don't believe are there right now.
Wow. It's a lot to think about. Wow, thank you so much. I feel like we could do a 4-hour podcast on this episode or this issue alone. And I will definitely be asking you to join us on a full-length podcast. So look for that email. But I'm wondering, people who are listening today who want more information about what you're talking about today, and then all of the things that you've brought up, is there a place where we can find the publications that you spoke about? Or if somebody is just generally interested in what you've talked about, where can they get more information?
Yeah, so the deemed consent paper it's been through peer review and it's been accepted with revisions. So it's in the stage of the journal looking at the revisions. So I assume it will be published, but I don't want to jump the gun on
For
it,
sure.
but it would be coming out in the Lancet America. So there's different Lancet journals, and this one is in the Americas. So, and it was very positively reviewed. So I think that's important. The other article is in the Circumpolar Health Journal, which looks at utility and equity and all of those issues, and again points to the ways in which through the system Indigenous people can be disadvantaged. And then of course, as I said, there's the work of Jay Gill and Aviva Goldberg and others. There's this emerging literature, but also I think if people are interested to look at the kidney literature, so not necessarily the organ donation and transplantation literature, but a lot of the kidney literature really speaks to those issues, right? Speaks to the issues of barriers to care and gaps in services.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and letting me snag you between sessions. So thank you so much. That's amazing. During the Banff CST Awards ceremony, Dr. Heather Ross was presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award. To my excitement, I was able to speak with her about women in transplant and how to test your limits. Welcome.
Thank you.
So if you could introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Heather Ross. I'm former head of the heart transplant program at Ajmera, and now I'm the head of the division of cardiology at the Peter Mount Cardiac Center. Still a transplanter by heart. Can't change the roots. That sort of gets in there and sort of is part of, I think, the fabric of who we are. But yeah, I'm 26 years into the job and still love it.
That's fantastic. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're going to be presenting tonight?
So I was asked to speak about women in transplants, and I've had this opportunity over my career to merge what I love to do in life, which is adventure and expedition travel, and my job. And it's something that we call Test Your Limits. It was founded in 2006. What's really special about it is that we have a heart transplant recipient, Dale Shipham, who comes, and often Dave Smith, who's a kidney transplant recipient. They're 23 and 25 years out from transplant respectively now.
Gosh.
And so the journey that I've had with them and on these Test Your Limits trips, of which there's now been 9, in many ways serve as a metaphor for how to not just survive, but thrive in the field of transplant. And I think it's not strictly a woman issue, but given that on many of these expeditions, I've been the only woman, in fact, on most of them, it does speak to me about some of the key things that you have to think about in order to succeed.
What are some of those things that we need as women in transplant or in general, I guess, in the world?
So I think the perseverance. So certainly early on, especially in the field of cardiology, which is a very male-dominated field, there were times when you're working hard and in some ways feel that you need to work more, do more, succeed at more to be at a level playing field. So the idea of perseverance, and that comes across on some of the trips that we've had, where it's kind of grueling day in, day out. You just put your head down and do what needs to be done. So perseverance is a big part. I also think that enjoying the journey, and I think I watched many of my colleagues who get maybe a little caught up in some of the challenges that are happening and forget that this is still their journey and their life. And it is more a vocation, I think, than a job. And you want to make sure that you are enjoying it. So trying not to sweat some of the small stuff and be focused on the bigger goal. And a lesson that I learned a long time ago, which is still one of my favorite quotes, is a goal without a plan is just a wish. And so it is sort of setting those goals, but making sure you put everything that you need behind them to succeed with them, right? And as my mom always said, once you've made a decision, make it the right decision. So try to actually, again, getting back to that perseverance and working towards the goal.
Amazing. Thank you. Thinking about that with transplant patients, we go through an insane journey, either whether we're starting from a crash start or if we're years and years until we eventually need these therapies and transplant. In my case, it was kidney and I was a crash start. So thrown into it without any knowledge. How do we kind of take those ideas through some of the hardest times of our life and apply like what you do on that mountain into those day-to-days that sometimes it can be hard to even get out of bed for some people?
Yeah, so I really think walking a mile in somebody's shoes is a huge part as a physician or healthcare provider, having compassion and trying to see things through somebody else's eyes. And so through these journeys, I myself have had pulmonary edema on one of the mountains, and another one of our trips, we were stranded with bad weather, waiting for the chopper to come in and rescue us. And you start to think about what it feels like for a patient to be on that journey. And I experienced these things for brief moments in time, whereas the patients, that's their existence until transplantation.
Yeah.
I think having had those experiences, which were pretty profound, even though they were short-lived, it gave me a much bigger perspective on what the journey might be like. So I do think, and I said it last night, I think it's just, I think the CST has done a really good job of crucially engaging the voice of donor families, recipients, persons with lived experience, like really understanding that journey, because if we can, then I think we can do a much better job preparing people for it.
Fantastic. And you were just awarded with an incredible honor. Congratulations, a Lifetime Achievement Award. That is fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was very special. So it way back in the day when I came to Toronto, a number of senior people at the time who are sort of legends right now in the field. So Ed Cole and Gary Levy supported and mentored me, and I got involved in the CST and actually went through and was president of the CST. And the CST and my time with the CST opened tremendous doors at an international level. So I a debt to the society. So it was an incredible honor.
Congratulations. I'm wondering if you can leave us with two pieces of advice. One piece of advice that you would give to female professionals, I guess, in general, and then maybe a piece of advice for our transplant community as a whole.
So I still think mentorship is probably one of the single most important things. And I think men do it differently. So there's sort of that washroom mentorship that happens, or golf mentorship that happens. I think women have to be more particular in ensuring that they get the mentorship from multiple levels for multiple different reasons, because different mentors can provide different advice. I still think mentorship is crucial, and I know that I've benefited tremendously from it. And as a mentor, have actually benefited because I learn constantly from the people I'm mentoring, right? So I still think mentorship is crucial. I think for those waiting, I think it is just so important to also get peer support and get that support from other recipients and other people on the waiting list. What I've seen is that that's grown since I started in transplantation, and only a transplant recipient knows what it's like to have a transplant. I can be involved in the care of patients, but I don't really know what it's like, despite having had some interesting experiences. but recipients do. And I think that peer level support is crucial. So if you're a patient and you don't have it, ask for it because it is tremendously beneficial.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you as well from the patient body as a whole. I know I don't speak for everybody, but it's not every day that we meet physicians like yourself who try to put yourself in our shoes. And so thank you for doing that, because it really does make a difference in our care and making us feel like we're worth what we're going through and that there's somebody out there who's got our back. So thank you.
Dave Smith and Dale Shipham have been tremendous mentors for me. So hopefully I'm continuing to learn on that journey to be better at what I do.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Lastly, but certainly not least, I bring you my conversation with Dr. Massimo Manziola about the immunology of xenotransplantation, which in this context is the transfer of solid organs from pigs to humans. Please welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Candice, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you can introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. My name is Massimo Manziola. I'm a transplant immunologist, and I work at NYU Langone Health in New York City. And my job, my bread and butter, if you wish, is histocompatibility. So is the determination of compatibility between a patient and a donor, any organ included, bone marrow transplant, face, hands. NYU is a very busy and challenging place. So I'm challenged by pretty much any type of transplant. So what I do every day is to compare patient and donors to determine whether there is risk of proceeding with transplantation. Yeah.
Fascinating. At the Banff CST conference, you discussed the immunology of xenotransplantation, which was thrilling and fascinating for me to get to sit and listen. And a lot of it, of course, went over my head. It was wonderful. I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit about what xenotransplantation is.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So xenotransplantation is the transplantation of non-human organs in humans. In this case, xenotransplantation is the transplantation of pig organs into human. Now, of course, you want to say, why would you do that? Very good question. Very good question. So as you know, there is a very large discrepancy between the patients that are awaiting organ transplant and an available organ. And this discrepancy, it doesn't seem to be reduced over time. And that is because the system, unfortunately, relies on somebody to die for somebody else to have a second chance in life. And also, unfortunately, so the living donation of certain organs, of course, like a kidney or liver, that is not ramping up. And some is not because there are no living donation, it's that the majority of patient and donor are emotionally connected, and so those are like, but there is no increase in altruistic donors, those that just want to give an organ to a complete stranger. And because of that, we have to think outside the box. And we say, like, how can we help these people? Considering, unfortunately, so Candice, that some of our patients don't ever get to the finish line. They stay in the wait list for so long, and then unfortunately we lose them, and they never had an opportunity to have an offer. So for those type of, especially for those type of patients, so they highly sensitized, they broadly sensitized against HLA antigens, it's our responsibility to think outside the box. And NYU Langone has always been pioneering in these changes in the transplantation world. And our leader, Dr. Robert Mongo, has started many years ago to work on this project of xenotransplantation. We have successfully transplanted in a descendant model. So is an individual that was brain dead and donated their body to research. And we wanted to test, is it in fact true that we can put a kidney organ into a human and this organ is not rejected immediately. And Last year, we did 2 pig kidney transplantation, and this year we did 2 pig heart transplantation. So we know now that it does work, and now we are approaching the immunology of xenotransplantation, which is what is going the patient your immune system. What would your immune system do when we put a pig organ? Because we already know that there is rejection between human to human, so you can kind of guess it that there will be even much so with pig and human. So my job as a transplant immunologist in this project is to try to figure out how do we study and how do we control the immune system in xenotransplantation.
Wow. From my perspective, since I'm nowhere close to an immunologist, listening about changing certain hormones and genes in pigs to make them smaller, and as well as modifying the antibodies, that's a big thing to do, and you've been doing it for a while now. Would these changes make those pig organs less likely to reject in a human?
It's a very good point. Yes, the short answer is yes. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. So the choice of pigs as a source of non-human organs is for many reasons. One of the reasons is that there is it's a readily available animal.
Right.
The physiology of the organs actually is very similar to that of the human as compared to other animals.
Okay.
But as you say, they grow a little bit larger than us. And also, as you mentioned, the organs, the pigs in particular, like other animals, they have some we would call antigens that we actually don't express. So our immune system is prepared against this antigen. And the reason is that we acquire immunity because we eat pig, right? And so we are exposed in the guts to these antigens, but also other bacteria have similar antigens. So basically, we build some sort of immunity. A way to explain this is like thinking about allergy, right? And say, I am allergic to this type of food. We are naturally allergic, if you wish, to some of these big antigens that we don't express. Therefore, naturally, if we be transplanted with a native organ, with an organ from a pig that hasn't been modified, we would reject it very quickly.
Okay.
And so it would not help. So in time, with studies that were done in baboons and other animals, we have learned which one are the main. And so what we did was to modify the genetics of the pig to abrogate the expression of these allergens. So even though we have allergy, there is no allergic response to the organ. Right. So now we use genetically modified pig to do this organ transplantation. And the experience at NYU Langone shows that they are safe within the first few days post-transplant, which are the days in which you would hyperacute reject the organ. So we were successful in bridging that gap. Now is what next, right?
Right. Exactly. And before I get to that big question of what next, thinking about all of those changes that you've made to those organs, would that mean that people would potentially need to take less immunosuppressants or less anti-rejection medication if they received one of those pig organs?
The moment not, and it's just because long-term studies in humans have never been done.
Right.
It's always long-term study have always been done in baboons, but baboons are not similar to us in terms of the medication that we give to the baboons to protect, so the immune suppression that you give to the baboons. So it's not comparable. But that's why NYU Langone and Dr. Montgomery has started this program, and we are almost at the finish line for doing this study in an extended period. Because as I said before, we have bridged the hyperacute rejection, and that doesn't occur. So what we need to study now is the rejection, the long-term rejection, right? Now, Candice, that's the thing, and that's part of my job, right? If we understand what causes the long-term rejection, we can attempt to genetically engineer pigs so that that mechanism will not occur anymore. So ideally, in the long term, better than in humans, we might be able to reach a point where actually you can have a lower immune suppression, and maybe eventually a point where there is no immune suppression. It's a little bit too far, so I don't want to give you any okay, it's a long shot, but of course that's our intent, which actually is also the NYU Langone philosophy for human to human. The goal for us is not just that of transplanting. The goal for us is to improve the quality of life after transplants. So even in human to human, the Transplant Institute at NYU Langone is actively working on what is needed to decrease immune suppression in human-to-human transplants, because we know that giving you an organ is only a one piece of the puzzle. The rest of your life should be as beautiful and as fulfilling as your life before you had your disease. And we are very committed in not forgetting that, because the game here for us is not just the numbers, but really improving the quality of life post-transplant.
Wow, that's incredible to hear. Thank you for saying that. And thinking about the number of people who are waiting right now for transplants around the world, it feels like that wait list continues to grow. How could pig organs support a more equitable system to allow more patients to get transplants and more people to get off of that wait list?
It's a very good point, Candice. Thank you. So it's going to be a phased transition, right? Of course, it's everything. We need to be cautious, right? This is a very exciting moment, but we need to be with our feet firm on the ground and make sure that we approach these the right way, the best way for the patient. So I'm envisioning that the initial step is going to be for those that are the most disadvantaged in the wait list. And so I'm talking about this very highly and broadly sensitized patient with a CPRA of 100% that have been sitting in the wait list for 15, 20 years, and they are getting no offers. And they are running out of option for dialysis, and they are risking their life. So I think that's one of the best approach. You might say, well, but there is a lot of antibody, there's a lot of allergy. Now, one of the study that we have done here in NYU Langone was to determine whether indeed there is some sort of cross-reactivity with the allergy, the antibody that you have against the human organs, and the allergy and reactivity against the pig organs, and it doesn't seem to be the case. So we believe that actually for these type of patients that are very highly sensitized, are not getting any offer, running out of option, the pig xenotransplant might be the only option for these patients. So I see the future as starting from there, and as we get better at it, right? Because again, don't forget, it's not just a question of putting an organ inside. Can we make this person's life better? If that is the case, and we can prove indeed that that works, I assume that the Simpsons is going to start widening up, right, and going down the list to the patients that are less sensitized. And of course, yes, I mean, my hope and my vision is that maybe one day anybody can be offered either possibilities, right?
Yeah.
What do you want, right?
Yeah, I think that's our all of our ultimate goal, right? We always think about our pie in the sky mission to end that wait list, right? And
that will be. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if and maybe I'm not lucky enough to see that in my lifetime, but I'm lucky enough that I was part of this wave. But can you imagine a day in which there is no kidney disease out there, because we can at least bridge it between you having a human organ with pigs. But the idea is going toward the fact that we have to make those organs safe.
Yes.
And then give anybody the option to choose based on what they want, you know what I mean? But yeah, that would be a dream come true. Yeah.
It really would. Yeah. For people who want to read more about your research or read more about NYU Langone, where could they find information?
Yes, NYU Langone, it's nyulangone.org. It's very simple to find. You find NYU Langone. And then you can go to the Transplant Institute subpage, and there you're going to find Dr. Robert Montgomery, which is our leader. And Dr. Montgomery, fun fact, is not only a very incredible surgeon and pioneering on many things in kidney surgery, in kidney transplantation. He was the first person that he invented the domino chain many years ago, or the laparoscopic procedure. But so he's actually a patient himself. Dr. Montgomery has received heart transplants years ago. So Dr. Montgomery has been advocating for the longest time about quality of life and better transplant for everyone. So you will find the information right there. And NYU Langone has a very active LinkedIn page where they are posting all this news about xenotransplantation. So you might want to follow so that. Other than that, you can always reach out to one of us in the Transplant Institute, and we can provide you papers, literature, and any other connection that you need.
Amazing. That's fantastic. I think people will be very interested to read more and learn more. And it's always great also to hear that not only has somebody benefited from a transplant in their own life, but then they're turning around and taking that personal experience to improve the lives of other people. So that's
yes. Candice, it's important. Yeah, it's important that we work on this together. We for the longest time I feel we kind of worked in silos, the medical and the patient donor community. We need to work together because we teach each other how to make the future better. Your experience is important to us because might shape up the way we do transplantation in the future. If we don't connect, we will never know and we cannot improve. But improvement, this is the only way forward. We know how to do a transplant.
Right.
The improvement is how to make it better, how to make it last longer, how to reduce immune suppression, how to make patients' life really better after transplant. That's the mission.
That's the best possible mission we can hear from your side of the table as well. So thank you so much. I'm wondering if there's anything else that you want to share with our Living Transplant podcast listeners before we head out.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank all the donors and all the living donors, all the families of the deceased donors. You all are fantastic people. They think about it, Candice, in the moment of the most and the deepest sorrow, you find yourself that moment of clarity to say, I want to donate the organ of my loved one. And one single donor, one single patient, one single donor can save 5 to more lives. It's significant. All these living donors that one morning wake up and say, you know what? I have 2 kidneys. I don't need them. I can give up one and save somebody else. Thank you so much. We talk a lot about patients, and it's important in my field to talk about patients and patient life and improving and doing better. but we cannot forget the donor side. And so I just want to say we are in this together. Talk to your clinician, ask questions, express your concerns. There is no question that is not the right question. If you have something, if you're concerned about, if you want to know more, ask away. We are here on a mission to make sure that you have the same opportunity that I have, right? So ask away, and we're in this together, and together we'll do great things. I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Massimo. Your passion comes through, and we're really grateful as patients and families and donors to know that we have people like you on our side. So thank you for all of the work that you do. And thank you so much for sharing all of that work, because it's not just fascinating, but it's also hopeful for all of us to think about what could be in the future. So thank you so much for joining me today and for everything.
Thank you for having me. Yes, thank you
Yeah.
for having me. And thank you for everything else that I learned through this experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for a special episode of Behind the Scenes at the Banff CST Conference. Please like, share, and subscribe to Living Transplant Podcast. If you have any ideas for episode content, we would love to hear from you. Please reach out to us at livingorgandonation@uhn.ca. We hope you enjoyed today, and I wonder